All right, guys, Pathfinder 2E versus DC20. If you've been watching my videos, you're probably sitting there thinking, okay, this guy's gonna really hate on Pathfinder 2E and really talk up DC20. And if you've been watching, congratulations, you know me really well. No, totally kidding. If I've given people that impression, then I do apologize, because at the end of the day, I hope that everyone plays TTRPGs. I think there's so much benefit to it. I think everyone has their own cup of tea. It doesn't matter which one to me that you play. I have my favorite, that is clearly DC20. I've built my channel around that, and I'm just giving you reasons. I'm not trying to hate on anything. I actually have a lot of respect for Pathfinder 2E, and I want to preface that, because if it wasn't for DC20, if I were to choose a system out of all the systems I've seen, I would probably pick Pathfinder 2E, because I'm a big fan of balance, of customization. So when Pathfinder does a really good job with that. So that would probably be the one that I would choose if it wasn't for DC20. But I digress. So if you want to hear my thoughts of why I think DC20 is better than Pathfinder 2E, then you've come to the right place. And even if you're not, and you just want to hear a nice argument, then enjoy the show. Again, I'm the Nerd Doctor, here to diagnose what's wrong with your RPG game and here to help you fix it. So let's dive in. Let's start off with design philosophy. So the design, and I'm going to do something here that I haven't done in a really long time, and that is use my notes, because I'm not an expert when it comes to Pathfinder 2E. I've played a lot more D&D. I played Pathfinder. I played 3.5. I've played ICRPG. I played Shadow Dark. I played a number of different TTRPGs. But Pathfinder's like the least of it, and so I really wanted to make sure I did a really good comparison for this video. So if you see me looking away, I'm looking at notes because I've got them. But the design philosophy is this is the system that was, after 2 years of observing problems with Pathfinder 1E and D&D 3.5, a large team went down with the goal of, let's really improve this, let's make that mathematical balance, predictable encounters, consistent rules, system mastery rewards. And if you're listening to that list right now, if you didn't know anything about Pathfinder and you knew something about DC20, you're like, that sounds exactly like DC20. I've been saying for a while now that Pathfinder is like the uncle of, or the grandfather of DC20. I think if you look at DC20 and you know Pathfinder 2E really well, you're like, there is a lot of similarity here, and there absolutely is. So let's get into it. Currently, the Pathfinder 2E player core rulebook is around 460 pages. Now, the DC20 core rulebook is still expanding. It's over 200 pages. It's and I think the core rulebook was, while the original core rulebook was over 630 pages. So, lots of pages, lots of rules. So with that in mind, let's go into DC20 core design philosophy. And a lot of the stuff that I just listed is going to fall into it, but Alan's goal it wasn't maximum balance. It's, let's keep tactical depth. Let's remove unnecessary complexity, make every class fun, make every class interesting. We still really want that balance, but not in so much of the way that where you just have to have all these really crunchy rules that bog things down. The core is, he wanted DC20 to have the most balance with the most accessibility, is really the core philosophy with DC20, is that new player is who he's targeting. He wants enough depth so that veteran players really enjoy DC20, but enough simplicity so that a new player can come in and not feel overwhelmed. Because Pathfinder 2E is very overwhelming. It's typically the system that people graduate to after playing years of certain systems and wanting something like with a little bit more flexibility in terms of balance and really more flexibility in terms of customization, and have that balance. Because the one thing that I've talked about over and over on this channel is just how unbalanced D&D is, and so many people have made channels off of just how unbalanced D&D is. So if I'm playing a 3.5 game right now, and if I could convince the DM to either switch to DC20 or Pathfinder 2E, I would. First big difference we're going to talk about is abilities versus attributes. Just like D&D, 2E has strength, dexterity, constitution, intelligence, wisdom, and charisma, whereas DC20 has intelligence, charisma, agility, and might. And you can kind of count prime modifier. Prime modifier is just the highest of those modifiers, so it's not a direct modifier, but it does play an influence in the game. But at the end of the day, the biggest difference for me between abilities and attributes between 2E and DC20 is just that. More options, more complexity. It's that simple. That's problem number one I have. With those 6 abilities, there's so much difference that a new player is going to have harder choosing between where they want to distribute their points, even if the book tells you this is my primary thing. Where's that secondary stuff? How do I want to play? Especially if I've never played it before, how do you know where to put it? And there are absolutely abilities that are more useful than others, period, when there's 6. In DC20, that 4 attributes, they've worked really hard at making them all really useful at different things. So they're not equal, they're not the same, but they are all equally useful in terms of what they are. And when you only have 4, it's much easier to distribute those first few points. So that's number 1. Number 2 is I really don't like the 2 different numbers to represent a modifier thing. So you've got, numbers in the abilities for 2E and D&D. They can range anywhere from 0 to 20 plus, depending on how you play the game, but typically range anywhere between 8 and 20, depending on how you play the game. And in that number, it really only represents, it's just a number. It doesn't really there. You use that number to determine what your modifier is. And I get the reason for it. The reason for it is they wanted you to have to put 2 points into something to increase your modifier by 1. But again, with DC20, you just have the modifier. So you put a point in the ability, you have another point in your modifier. That's it. And they've just boiled the game down to be simple enough where you can do that and not have as many issues. But that's abilities versus attributes. Next thing is skills. So the skills in Pathfinder 2E, there are 17 different skills that you can have. In DC20, it's going to end up with 9 more than likely. So, you've got less skills. Again, more choices, more problems. and again, I get the reasoning behind it is you didn't want to have skills having a wide range of things. It was much easier for players to have more powerful characters if they had more consolidated choices and everything like that. So I get it, and it just raises up the crunch. It raises up the complexity, and that's it. So again, for a new player, less options is going to be better. And I know the Pathfinder person might be sitting there thinking, well, players are going to get really overpowered really easily if they only have to do that. Well, less skills means less points. It's just as simple as that. And they do care in DC20 about making sure that you can't be good at everything. And that's the whole point. And the way they kind of solve this is with the concept of trades. Bringing me into my next topic, trades versus backgrounds. In D&D and Pathfinder 2E, you get backgrounds. Backgrounds can contribute to giving you ability point boosts. It can give you skill points. It can give you, additional benefits in terms of a feat, more than likely. And then in DC20, you have trades. So trades they work very similarly to skills, but they are more unique situations, meaning like, okay, well, one of my trades is lockpicking. So if you're playing DC20 and you decide I want to try to pick a lock, well, if you have a trade, you can use your trade modifier, which is typically going to be higher than maybe your, in DC20, it's going to be it might be your acrobatics, it might be your stealth, depending on what the DM wants to call for, but that trade modifier is going to be higher because it's more situational than those other ones, which are more general. So it does come with a little bit more abstraction to the game in DC20 by having less skills, but it also makes interpretation much more fun and flexible for the DM and however they want to interpret the situation and go with that. But trades allow for more specialized situations. I know there's been talk about possibly adding backgrounds, so maybe this video is coming out too early, but we'll see what happens with that in the coming months. Next thing we want to talk about is conditions in Pathfinder 2E versus DC20. So in 2E, there are over 40 conditions. That's a lot of crunch. That's a lot of situations and again, they're only useful in certain situations. So more variety means less situations that you can use them in, whereas less variety means more situations you can use them in. In DC20, we've got around 20 conditions right now, but a little bit more than that. I think it's like 29 or something like that. Off the top of my head, this number, the exact number, did not make it in my notes for some reason. But and it's really not important. I think that's why I didn't include in my notes, because the number is going to go down. So now that you're watching this video, depending on when you watch it, there could be less conditions now than there would at the time of making this video. Next thing is defenses. So in Pathfinder, you have the primary defense, the armor class, and then you kind of have to these technical defenses, which are your fortitude, reflex, and will, which are really just your saves. I mean, some people still may use individual ability saves, but for the most part, things either target your armor class or one of those three. So you technically kind of have 4 targets. In DC20, a little bit different. You have your precision defense, you have your area defense, you have your saves. So, you know, if you were doing 1-to-1, that would be, you know, 4 versus 6, I guess. But in this situation, you really have to talk about spells when you're talking about it in terms of defenses, because melee is pretty simple. You know, you're for the most part, you are only attacking precision defense. You're only targeting AC. But and there might be maneuvers or something. Again, this is where I'm less familiar with Pathfinder 2e, but there may be situations where those other things may come into play. But for the most part, these come into play when it comes to spells. And the biggest difference here is, and I'll get more into differences between spell casting, but in a spell, you don't just target one of those things and it automatically works. Pathfinder 2e and D&D, you have spells that automatically work and just require the target to make a save. They expend a spell slot and that's it. It's not really a big fan of that. I don't like things automatically working. I like seeing if you roll to, you know, hit. And so that was really the biggest reason for this split between precision defense and area defense, because you would spells no matter what you're rolling. And if you're rolling to attack an area, you're rolling to attack a target's AD. If you're rolling to attack a target, you're rolling to attack PD, your precision defense versus area defense. Those saves come into play kind of a step later. Some spells might have a saving throw attached, or you have to enhance a spell in order to get it. And with martial characters, you have maneuvers, which again, same thing. You're targeting either AD or PD, and then you're going ahead and maybe you add something into it that makes them roll a save. So biggest difference there is you've got basically 2 steps if you need it, but with the other one, it's kind of an auto hit, and your save will kind of decrease what it is, right? Maybe negates the damage, maybe halves the damage, but you're always taking it. It's like a guaranteed hit. And it's just something I'm not a big fan of. I don't like guaranteed hits. I don't like guaranteed anything in TTRPGs. And I don't know why. I just keep looking over here. I know the camera's over here, so just, you know, bear with me. I know it's annoying, but I'm looking at my face in the camera. That's what it is. Making sure I'm straight, making sure I'm where I want to be. But those are the biggest differences between the defenses. Is in one, you have 2 with saves as an extra thing. The other is, depending on what it's targeting, you have 4 different targets. Next is the martial versus spellcaster balance. So, you know, this is something that I didn't really address in an earlier video, and I talked about this idea of balance and being equal when it comes to martials and spellcasters. And one emphasis I want to emphasize here is that I do not believe that they should be able to do the exact same things. They should not be equal in that way. What they should be is equal in utility and overall function. But at the end of the day, the biggest thing that it comes down to between a martial character and a spellcaster in games like Pathfinder 2e and D&D is how, like the martials are the heavy hitters that can do it, that can go longer, whereas the spellcasters are just more utility, and they can go even heavier in hits, but they go shorter, because when they run out of spell slots, there's less utility there. They can still lean back on their cantrips, but and that same flavor still exists in something like DC20, but where the bridge was really gapped, in my opinion, when it comes to martials versus spellcasters, was the concept of maneuvers. And those maneuvers made martial characters, gave them so much more utility, and it was not just this whole I go and hit somebody type thing. And DC20 really fixed that. Next, we'll go into spellcasting, because I pretty much already summarized the martial characters by just explaining that, you know, in DC20 you get maneuvers, you get stamina. It gives a resource to martial characters. It gives more utility to martial characters. And that's the big thing. With spellcasters, the biggest difference is in spell slots versus mana. You know, in Pathfinder 2e, you've got your spell slots. This is the old broken system that I've never agreed with, and I've said that in my DC20 versus D&D video. Never been a fan of it. So I really like, you know, DC20's concept of mana, where every spell has been brought down to their simplest form, and you can spend more mana in those spells in order to increase their damage, increase their range, increase their area, any number of those things. You get to really be like a spell architect when you're casting spells in DC20, whereas in D&D and Pathfinder 2e, you've got a blanketed just, here's what it is. You can level it up by spending higher versions of the spell slot, and usually gets you a little bit more power, not usually more area necessarily. Sometimes yes, sometimes no. And like once the spell slot's gone, it's gone. And they've always just felt clunky to me, and I'm not a big fan of them. And again, you run into the same problem as you do in D&D, where like you might have multiple spells that do very similar things, but like they just overlap. Like just the simplest example I can give you is something like hold monster, hold person, you know. So like instead the spell is just hold in DC20, where you can hold their target of a certain size, and then you pour more mana into use like bigger sizes or types of monsters. So you don't have to get new spells that do the same thing and take up, you just have one spell that does it. So you're gonna inherently have a little less number of spells in DC20, but that's also better because, again, more options, more problems. I've already said that once. Next is going to be hit points and scaling. Again, this is Pathfinder 2e, so much better at balancing things out than you get in D&D. So I just want to emphasize that now. But when it comes to scaling, you know, you've got these monsters that are over 300 hit points. Your heroes tend to turn into superheroes. Again, you don't have the same problem that you have in D&D. So I don't want to bog down that, but I really like how much lower everything is in DC20. It's a little bit easier to manage, in my opinion. I think they've done a really great job balancing out the levels and scaling and everything like that. I do believe that in 2e, you're still going to run into the same problem where you're just going to have these really long combats that drag on because of hit point sponges and everything like that. Whereas in DC20, the philosophy is 3 to 5 rounds. And that's just shorter combats. I know people want those massive epic combats. I do believe that you can have it without having to spend hours slugging it out with someone in order to do that, and DC20 just does that really well. Last is the big thing, is the action points. You know, I want to say that this is probably the #1 comment I get on all my videos is Pathfinder 2e solves it, Pathfinder 2e solves that. And so, like I said, like DC20 is very similar in concept to Pathfinder 2e, but it's simplifying those mechanics. You know, with combat we have the action points. So in Pathfinder 2e you get 3 action points and you get 1 reaction, and then in DC20 you get 4 action points, which can be used for both actions and reactions. So that's a massive difference there. Now the biggest thing that you have to factor in there is you have a 6-second turn versus a 12-second turn. In DC20 you have a 12-second turn. So the reaction that you have is not equal to an action point in DC20 because you can only use it. So you only get 3 on your turn with Pathfinder 2e. And then in DC20 you get 4, and then once you've used those 4, once you end your turn, they replenish, and you can use any one of them all the way up to your 4 to use them as reactions. You lose them on your turn, but you have 4. So, and I think that's the trade-off, which we give you 1 extra point, but you have the flexibility to use them on reactions or actions, which I just think is such a cool and fun thing to do. It makes people pay way much more attention during combat just because of the fact that you have to pay attention. You have to know when you can use those reactions in order to use them. If you're not paying attention, you may miss the opportunity to use a reaction. So there's so much more engagement in a combat, which does make things move quicker as well. The last thing we're going to talk about is multi-classing. So I've talked about this briefly in other videos, but there's this concept of, I think it's very under talked about, but a concept of traits in Pathfinder 2e. Everything has it's kind of like tags in DC20. Tags are used to kind of help identify what spells do in DC20. Traits are how do you identify everything that everything can do. And there's a lot of prerequisites in Pathfinder 2e. So if you've got this idea of a build, you know, you kind of have to research sometimes down the line how you're going to get there and plan every single one of the ways that you're going to take these fates and get these feats and get these traits in order to get to where you want to get. Again, I don't want to use, this is a good example. It's not going to be exact for 2e, but the example is that in our game that we're playing, my friend is trying to be kind of like an arcane trickster rogue in D&D terms, but in order to get the requirements they need to get their wizarding abilities, they need to build up so many things in so many different areas. So that can be really challenging for a new player to sit there and think about. You've got over 5,000 feat options in Pathfinder 2e. Like, that's insane to me. I know a lot of people love the options, love the bloat and everything like that, but again, I just look for something a little bit simpler, and I do get that from DC20. When it comes to DC20, there are some prerequisites, don't get me wrong, but they're usually very obvious. Like, oh, you want Berserker Rage. Well, first you have to have the Rage feature first. So it just makes sense in that way. Whereas everything else, if you want a multi-class, if you want to, you go and take the multi-class option and choose a feature you want from any different one. Every single class has at least 2 features you can choose from. So two people can be a rogue and multi-class and do a cleric, but we could take 2 different features and be totally different concepts. So having smaller options doesn't automatically mean less variety. I mean, it technically does, but you're never in a lifetime going to get through all those different options in D&D. I think if you're really committed, you might be able to get through it in DC20, but even then it would still be hard. But I love the simplicity of it. It makes it much more approachable for a new player to go through these concepts because they're very, very simple. So that's my big, comparison. I can't go into downtime or social encounters as much. None of those things have been finalized in DC20 at the time of this video. If I had to summarize this up in this last sentence, and I'm going to read this word for word, but if I had to summarize each system as objectively as possible, Pathfinder 2e is a highly engineered tactical RPG built around mathematical balance, precision rules, strong encounter design, and a deep character progression. It rewards players who enjoy mastering system. Again, it's the system that people like to graduate to when they want a little bit more balance and customization. DC20 is streamlined tactical RPG built around flexibility, player expression, faster gameplay, and reducing complexity while preserving those meaningful choices, balance, and customization. It rewards players who enjoy creativity and adaptability. The most important takeaway for viewers is that these games are not trying to beat each other. I mean, maybe in a sense they are, but at the same thing, Pathfinder 2e is asking how balanced and tactical we make a fantasy RPG. DC20 is asking how much complexity we can remove before we lose that tactical depth, and I do think they do a really great job. Those different goals explain almost every mechanical difference between these 2 systems, and they're both great systems. So you probably heard enough me chatting about. Again, if you're a big fan of DC20 and you want a little bit more of it, then head over to DC20forge.com. That is my digital software, everything you need for DC20, from running campaigns to building characters and everything you need. And so I'm always working on making it better. It's not perfect, it's not D&D Beyond, but it is getting there, and it will get there. Head over there if you're interested in that. If you like the videos, don't forget to hit those like and subscribe buttons. Also, we have a podcast that it only has 2 episodes right now, but you can find it anywhere that you're looking for a podcast, including my channel here on YouTube. But follow us on Instagram, Twitter, Patreon if you want to support the DC20 Forge project, as I'm the only person working on it, and I could use all the help I can get. So thanks again for listening, guys. Stay clever and play smarter.